Hello, I'm Philip Mugglestone, and in this series of videos we're covering the R integration for SAP HANA. In this video we're going to look at troubleshooting, identifying typical issues or problems you may encounter using the R integration for SAP HANA, and also looking a little bit at performance tracing, how you can see how long things actually take and whether it's the HANA side or the R side that's taking that time. So let's have a look. So for our first example, let's just try running a procedure that we may have already created. Let's see what happens. Let's take this call and let's run that. And we see, we get an error. It says search table error, unable to connect with rserve. None of the rserve can be connected. And it gives the IP address and the port number. So cannot connect the host with the port. So there seems to be a problem in actually being able to talk to the R server from the HANA server. So to further troubleshoot that, one of the things you can do is to go to the configuration, and we saw this in previous videos, is to actually look and check that the information in configuration is correct. So for index server and then the calc engine, we see we have the IP addresses and the port numbers of one or more R servers you want to access, and of course it will work with failover if you put them with more than one R server. You can also have some other parameters, but what I can see here, there's a little error. I actually just changed the port number for the benefit of this example. If we now change it back to the port 30020, which is the port we're using on that server, it should work fine. So now we've changed that back. Let's go back to the code and try calling, and this time we can see that it runs the procedure okay. Successfully executes it. So that's one of the things that you might want to look at, is checking that the server is the right server name and the right port number. Normally that would be okay, and that's configured centrally within HANA. What you could also check if you're not getting a result is that the actual R process, the rserve process, is up and running on that R server. That's something we've seen in other videos already in this sequence. As a second example, I'm going to introduce a little bit of an error. We're going to create or recreate this procedure. However, I'm going to introduce a little bit of an error. For example, we might look at a column name that doesn't exist because X loyalty doesn't exist. So if I'm to run that definition to create the procedure, let's run that. We can see the procedure definition runs because the actual R script code is not processed when you create the definition. You're just creating a procedure that will subsequently call to R. However, if we then go and try to run this procedure, so let's call it, we will now see that we get an error message. Now, in fact, the error message you get already in HANA Studio in your log window are pretty explicit and pretty clear. So you can see execution of R script failed, error in the data frame, undefined column selected. So it's pretty much helping you get to this X loyalty. It gives you a stack trace of exactly what's been going on at that time. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, if you wanted to see a little bit more than this information, plus this information as well, then you can do that by going to the index server trace. So if you go to the diagnosis files, and then we can easily filter just on index server, and we go to the one that relates to your server. In our case, it's this SLES 11 server. Open that up, and at the bottom of there, you will find actually the error messages we just saw, plus you'll find some more information. You'll find quite a few additional rows that give more background information on how the actual job was running and what server it was calling, etc., etc. So you may find you get some more useful information as well as the actual error messages. But generally, the error message you get directly in HANA Studio is a pretty good one. So it's not often you would need to go to the index server. Now, assuming that your code is running, so let's just now fix that one back together. Okay, X loyalty. Let's now recreate the procedure. Of course, we drop it first. Of course, if you try to recreate the procedure without dropping, that's another thing that you might encounter. Of course, you cannot execute, cannot use duplicate name of function. Well, that's because the procedure already exists. So it's up to you to drop it and recreate it. Now, this time, if we want to make our call, we'll clear out the table and we'll call our procedure. You can see that the procedure has worked and we got our results. Okay, but it says it actually took 668 milliseconds. So exactly in terms of running that and executing here, executing took 262 milliseconds to run. So how do you identify, well, where was that time taken? It was obviously very fast here, but it could be longer. It could be taking a little longer for you. What was actually done on the HANA side? How long was spent transferring data to the R server, getting results back from the R server, and how much time was spent actually doing the processing on the R server? So it's possible to use the log to get that kind of information. In fact, it's going to be in the index server log here. However, that is not something you get by default. So what you need to do is to go to the configuration and to turn on an option, and you do this within index server, but inside the trace area. And inside of trace, you need to add a new parameter, and the parameter is called our client, and you set its value to info for information. Okay, now this is fully documented in the reference guide for R that you can get from help.sap.com. So you can find those details there if you need it, but this is just a simple parameter. We set that parameter to info. Now, if we were to rerun the procedure, let's just isolate it where we'll clear out the results table. Now we'll rerun our procedure. And you can see it ran, and it ran again at about the same time, 262 milliseconds to run that. If we now go to the index server and refresh, you'll see we get a lot more information being added to this file. So what we can see actually is as we started that run, it gave trace context, and then the R client is started, so it's just started our execution. You can see it's doing different things. Preparing the data frame to send to R took 0 milliseconds. Sending it to R took 1 millisecond, so that was pretty fast. Preparing the second one, which was our parameter table, and sending that took 37 milliseconds to send over. Remember, that one had a character field in it as the name. So you can see that character information actually is significantly slower in the transfer than simple numbers. And then the whole data transfer to R took 38 milliseconds. The R script actually started to execute. That itself took 83 milliseconds. And then we got the results being converted and sent back over, and we see that took about 1 millisecond. So the data transfer is optimized by the R integration, and compression takes place. So the data transfer is pretty quick. And then you've got the execution, which in this case was the longest thing of actually running the clustering analysis on the R server. So you can see now that 248 milliseconds, you can see how it was actually broken down. So that can be very useful if you want to do more troubleshooting. So now we've seen a few examples of how you can troubleshoot when you're working with the R integration for SAP HANA.